UFC Kansas is this weekend, and in the main event, we have Ian Machado Garry taking on Carlos the Nightmare Prates. In the co-main event, we have Zhang Mingyang, the Mountain Tiger, taking on Anthony Lionheart Smith. We got the Lion versus the Tiger. I just realized that as I was reading the names out. But still, dude, that's a decent matchup. We also have other names such as Abus Magomedov versus Michel Pereira, Nicholas Dalby taking on someone else, I don't even know who he's facing, and a bunch of other fun fights that I'm not going to be talking about. I'm just going to be talking about the co-main event and the main event because that's all you guys really care about, let's be honest. But let's talk about it. Anthony Smith in his retirement fight against Zhang Mingyang, and I want to say Anthony Smith is going to win this, dude, but it's Anthony Smith, dude. Anytime you want to bet on Anthony Smith to win a fight, he loses. You know, his last win is against Vitor Petrino in early last year. Obviously, that Vitor Petrino win has not aged that greatly, as Dustin Jacoby has just beat Vitor Petrino. But still, dude, Anthony Smith, obviously, he's fought for the title. On paper, Anthony Smith beat John Jones. On paper, Anthony Smith is one of the greatest of all time. But I don't know how good Anthony Smith is going to be. You know, we've seen him in his last fight against Dominic Reyes, and he just looked absolutely abysmal there. This guy was begging to get punched by Dominic Reyes. It's pretty sad, dude, when you look at it. And I don't think Anthony Smith was ever that good. I think we can all acknowledge that Anthony Smith was never that good. But still, dude, Anthony Smith, he's 36. He knows this is going to be his retirement fight. And I feel like when a lot of guys come back for just one last retirement fight, it doesn't go too well. I think Anthony Smith is just here to cash in, get his final UFC paycheck before he retires. And, dude, if this was anyone else against Zhang Mingyang, I would probably go with them. You know, I don't think Zhang Mingyang's that good. This guy's trick-shotting random bums in the Asian league, in the Asian minor league, dude. He clip farmed against the same guy 3 times, and all of that guy's 3 professional fights were all Zhang Mingyang. He went 0-3. All of his fights were losses to Zhang Mingyang. You know, they had a trilogy for absolutely no reason. Zhang Mingyang, I love when you just look at UFC fighters' record before the UFC, and they are just trick-shotting against Magomed, dude. These random nobodies. You know, I understand when you're like 1-1, when you're 2-1, coming up the rankings, you can face random 0-1 bums. But when you're like 10-0 and you're facing like 0-5 guys, that makes me kind of mad. But, you know, I get that's how a lot of people get into the UFC. I can't really complain. It just makes me laugh a little bit. In terms of how I've seen this fight go, dude, it's Anthony Smith. I don't think he's going to last that long, dude. I want to say Anthony Smith is going to pull off an upset in his final fight. You know, in iconic Anthony Smith fashion, being the iconic gatekeeper that we have all come to know and love. But I honestly don't think that Anthony Smith is the Anthony Smith we have today. The guy's 36, and Zhang Mingyang is probably going to knock this guy out in the first round. You know, Zhang Mingyang does have a pretty good knockout ratio. I think he's finished all 16 of his fights, or no, all 18 of his fights, 12 by KO and 6 by submission. So I'll give it to Zhang Mingyang, dude, but don't expect Zhang Mingyang to be anything good in the future of this division, dude. This will probably be Zhang Mingyang's last win in the UFC. But yeah, dude, now let's talk about the main event. Carlos Prates versus Ian Machado Garry, dude. This is actually a good fight, and it's really rare that we see 2 young contenders that are coming up the rankings fighting to progress their careers. Shout out to Ian Garry, dude, because this fight is arguably better than the original fight we got in Khalil Rountree versus Jamal Hill. This fight is so close, dude, because I don't really know how to judge Carlos Prates, dude. This guy's finished like all of his fights in the UFC in like the second or first round, so I don't know how his cardio is, and I think in a 5-round fight that will come into effect. I also want to point out that we aren't in the Apex Carlos Prates, so you can't just chase guys down and corner them into the small little Apex octagon that there is. So I think that's going to be a little bit of a challenge for him too. I don't know how good his gas tank is going to be across 5 rounds, you know? We've seen Ian Garry's gas tank against Shavkat Rakhmonov where his stock arguably went up. Like, someone played the clip where he's like, I went 5 rounds with the boogeyman of the division. Yeah, Ian Garry, you're a clown, dude. I'm not that high on Ian Garry. I just don't know, dude, because who knows how good Shavkat Rakhmonov was in that fight. I know Shavkat Rakhmonov was dealing with an injury in that Ian Garry fight, or maybe the injury didn't even affect Shavkat Rakhmonov at all, and Ian Garry was just genuinely just as good or a little bit worse than Shavkat Rakhmonov. But in terms of actually how I'm seeing this fight playing out, dude, I don't know. I'm so conflicted, dude. I have no idea who is going to win this fight, and I think I have my pick in mind, and I'm probably going to go Never mind, dude. I just got to talk about this fight a little bit more. That maybe I can gaslight myself into thinking someone's gonna win. So Carlos Prates obviously has the knockout power. He has the power advantage. He has the striking advantage. Ian Garry has the wrestling. He has the grappling advantage, and he has decent striking. Is Carlos Prates grappling that good? You know, he has decent takedown defense. We've never seen him really abused on the ground, and I think Ian Garry could be one of the first fighters to exploit that. I really do. You know, a lot of people are doubting Ian Garry, and a lot of people are saying that, oh, Ian Garry is going to get clowned on by CP. You know, I'm going to have a really good time watching CP this weekend, but I do think Ian Garry has probably the better chance of beating him. I got to check the fighting odds. I think Carlos Prates is actually the favorite in this fight, and that is the opinion that I'm seeing amongst a lot of MMA fans on YouTube and online in general. And I think that is a mistake. I honestly do think that is a mistake because I am going to go with Ian Garry. You know, I've seen a lot of people talking about Carlos Prates like he is this insane knockout artist, and yep, that's fair because that is exactly what Carlos Prates is. But Carlos Prates is doing it against Neil Magny. Neil Magny just got KO'd against Michael Morales like 2 months earlier. I don't think that Carlos Prates is all that, dude. He has nice knockout power, and sure, we've seen this so many times where a fighter has nice knockout power and nothing else, completely one-sided, and their UFC career just doesn't go how we expected it to go. I think this could be the first time that the Fighting Nerds plot armor actually runs out, and I am going to go with Ian Garry for that reason, dude. Ian Garry is my pick. I think it's going to go decision. I think it's going to be a good fight. Both of these guys' stocks are going to go up even more. But Ian Garry, we've seen him in 5-round fights like I talked about earlier. He's just more experienced in the UFC. Carlos Prates is knocking out bums, and he's not that good. He has nothing going for him other than his striking. And I've seen a lot of people talking about, bro, if you don't think Carlos Prates is going to land on Ian Garry and not knock him out in 5 rounds, that's a lot of time to knock out Ian Garry. I acknowledge that, but I think Ian Garry has decent head movement. You know, we didn't really see that in the Shavkat Rakhmonov fight, but Shavkat Rakhmonov has horrible head movement too, by the way. But Ian Garry, he's going to be able to move out of the way of most of these shots. He's going to be able to, even if Carlos Prates does hurt him, I can totally see Ian Garry just shooting for a takedown. And, you know, once Ian Garry gets your back, you're probably going to just be there for the rest of the round. We've seen that against Shavkat Rakhmonov. That was one of the only rounds Shavkat lost. We've seen that against MVP, where MVP just was stuck against the cage for like a solid round against Ian Garry. And I do think Ian Garry's grappling is arguably better than his striking. You know, I do believe Charles Oliveira will be in Ian Garry's corner this weekend. And Ian Garry's pretty good, dude. I think a lot of people are going to be starting to talk about Ian Garry like he could be a title contender after this fight. So I am going to go with Ian Machado Garry to win this fight by decision, dude. I think a lot of you guys are going to be very disappointed with Carlos Prates' his fight game. You know, Ian Garry is actually the favorite. I thought I was picking an underdog here. But, you know, amongst not Vegas and normal people in the UFC community amongst YouTube, Carlos Prates is the favorite. So yeah, Ian Garry by decision. That is my prediction, boys. If Ian Garry gets chinned, if he gets flatlined, then come back to this video and laugh at me, dude. I don't really care. But thank you guys for watching. MMA Outpost out. Hold on, dude. It just came out that Ian Garry has a nasty cut right below his right eye. And honestly, dude, this could be the deciding factor in this fight. You just watched the last couple minutes of the video. You know that I was going back and forth, dude. I could not decide between Carlos Prates and Ian Garry. I originally thought that Ian Garry was going to be able to mix in his wrestling. He was going to be able to afford to take a couple big shots to the head. And with this just coming out, Ian Garry cannot afford to take a couple big shots in the head. Carlos Prates is riding a 10-fight knockout streak. And obviously, when you're facing someone as good as Carlos Prates, when you're facing someone who has some of the nicest striking in the UFC, like Carlos Prates, you do not want to go into a fight having a nasty cut like this. If Carlos Prates lands once on that cut, it is realistically going to be over. I could see this fight ending by doctor stoppage in the 3rd round. That is my official prediction for this fight. This information has just came out, so that's why I had to make a quick edit to this video. And obviously, this is probably just very recently. This is probably one of Ian Garry's last fighting sessions before he took to this fight and went to Kansas. And I do believe that Ian Garry, he should be pulling out of this fight, dude. Ian Garry, obviously, he took this fight on short notice already, so it wouldn't be very nice if he pulled out. But still, dude, if you're you're actually thinking about this guy's career, this is probably going to be another unfortunate loss for him against Carlos Prates, and he cannot afford to take 2 back-to-back losses when he was riding a 15-fight win streak before that. Ian Garry is probably going to lose this fight just because of that cut. It's going to open up. It's going to be nasty, dude. That is my official prediction. Carlos Prates by second round or third round doctor stoppage. I think Ian Garry, he just doesn't want to pull out of this fight because he wants to be classified as that BMF, as a guy who's willing to fight anywhere, anytime, any place. And with him pulling out of this fight, it would ruin that narrative. But Ian Garry has to think about his career. He has to think about his future in the UFC. And yeah, man, for real this time, MMA Outpost out.